I walked up the gravel drive to what was supposed to be my forever project and instead found an excavator chewing through my front porch, a demolition crew shouting over engines, and the HOA president standing there grinning like she'd just won a prize, clipboard tucked to her chest, telling me I had abandoned my own mansion while the carved oak staircase I'd fallen in love with lay shattered in the yard like firewood. And in that moment, I honestly had to ask myself if I was hallucinating or if this was really how my new life on Silvercrest Lake was going to go. 6 months earlier, I'd bought Ravenshore Estate, a faded 1920s lakefront monster in rural northern Vermont. 6 bedrooms, 2 acres, a strip of private shoreline that had lived in my head since childhood. Picked it up at auction for $127,000 when nobody else wanted to touch it. The listing photos looked like a haunted house you'd dare your friends to spend the night in. But I saw the stone fireplace from 1924, the 100-year-old oak staircase, the bones that hadn't given up yet, and I thought, I'm Ethan Caldwell, 20 years in the Navy Construction Battalion. I've poured concrete under mortar fire and rebuilt bridges in places you can't pronounce. If anyone can bring this place back, it's me. I'd cleared out my savings, added a rehab loan, sold the nice truck, told my daughter Kayla her old man was finally going to build the lake house he'd been promised in magazine clippings by Grandma Lillian. The woman who raised me in a cramped apartment in Buffalo taped photos of big porches and long docks inside her closet door and whispered, "One day, baby," even though she never owned anything but a bus pass and a mop bucket. And when she died before that dream came true, I quietly promised I'd get one of us there someday. First walkthrough of Ravenshore. The place smelled like wet plaster and dead rodents. Every step cracked broken glass, but sunlight cut through busted shutters and turned dust into something almost holy. I ran my hand along the oak newel post at the base of the stairs, cool and worn smooth by other lives, and I felt her there with me. And right then I mapped out 18 months of sweat, foundation, roof, wiring, millwork, me doing most of it with my own 2 busted hands, stretching every dollar. Day 3, a white luxury SUV stops at the end of my drive. Out steps this woman in her mid-60s, hair sprayed into a helmet, pastel cardigan, clipboard clutched like a badge. She doesn't bother with hello, just, "You must be Mr. Caldwell." And before I can answer, she introduces herself as Patricia Langford, chair of the Architectural Review Board and president of the Harbor Heights Association, then announces that Ravenshore violates 17 codes and 4 covenants, and I have 30 days to submit plans for their approval. I tell her my deed shows no HOA, no covenants, and she gives me this pitying smile that makes my teeth grind, says the plat was amended in 2003. I bought in whether I knew it or not. And if my title company missed that, well, not her problem. Then she tiptoes back to her SUV like setting foot on my gravel might stain her shoes. Later that night, I look her up. Patricia Langford, real estate broker, vice chair of the planning board, widow of Judge Langford, owns 3 short-term rentals on the same lake, runs Langford and Company Realty, basically the unelected queen of this water, and I realize I didn't just buy an old house. I stepped into somebody's private chessboard. I still try to play nice. Put together 40 pages of plans with stamped drawings and engineer reviews, submitted every nail I intended to use. Got a rejection in 72 hours for being out of character with the neighborhood. Appealed, walked into a 10-minute hearing in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and fake flowers. Patricia mispronounced my name 3 times while her friend Gordon Price, a retired dentist with a permanent frown, asked if a guy in my condition could handle that scope of work, eyes flicking to the brace on my leg from the training accident that ended my military career at year 18, and she suggested in that honeyed voice that maybe a cozy cottage would be more appropriate for me than a historic estate. I swallowed every comeback, told them I'd revise and resubmit, but as I walked out and heard Gordon mutter, "Good luck with that," I knew this wasn't about siding or shingles. It was about getting me off this point of land so somebody else could cash in. I hired a structural crew anyway, 3 guys to shore up a failing north wall before winter ripped it loose. Day 2, a county inspector named Frank Hollis trundled up, taped a bright stop work order to my front door, and said my foundation survey was off by 18 inches, so my permits were invalid. All work halted until I got a new survey and survived a 6 to 8 week review. The survey company swore their numbers were perfect, and when I asked who claimed otherwise, they pointed to a Note from the Permit Review Committee, signed by 1P. Langford. And there it was. She wasn't just closing doors quietly. She was using the machinery of government like a personal hammer. My crew had to bail, my budget bled, and one cold evening I sat alone on that bare staircase, wind whistling through half-framed walls, listening to the lake slapping the rotten dock, and thinking maybe Kayla was right when she called this place a felony waiting to happen. Maybe I should cut my losses, sell to a developer, go crawl back to safe, boring, small, and then my hand found that oak post again, worn by a century of other fingers hanging on through worse winters than this, and I thought about Grandma Lillian whispering one day, and I decided that if Patricia wanted a fight, she'd finally picked someone who knew how to dig in. The next morning, I went not to the hardware store, but to the county building, down into a records room that smelled like damp paper and old mistakes, sat under flickering fluorescent tubes, and pulled every plat map, zoning change, and HOA document tied to Harbor Heights for the last 30 years, ran microfilm until my eyes watered, drank gas station coffee that tasted like bad decisions, and on the third night I found it. The 2003 amendment Patricia kept waving around, the one supposedly dragging Ravenshore Estate into the HOA. Only problem, it had never been ratified by the higher legislative body, just rubber-stamped by a friendly town board, and every signature on that petition belonged to someone who owned land surrounding my place. Patricia, Gordon, her late husband, 2 other insiders. And right after that paperwork slid through, the assessed values on their lots jumped almost 30%, while properties like mine became easier to bully. And I remembered enough from a dusty military law course to recognize the phrase spot zoning and selective enforcement, the kind of illegal carve-out that makes state attorneys general lick their chops. I scanned everything, wrote a furious 6-page memo with legal citations courtesy of Google and Spite, and at nearly midnight fired off an email to the full town council, CC'd the state's HOA fraud hotline, and dropped Olivia Chun, editor at the Little Brightwater Gazette, into the thread for good measure, hit send, sat there with my leg throbbing and my heart pounding, and realized I'd just kicked the biggest hornet's nest in the county. It worked faster than I expected. The council scrambled into an emergency session, which is politicians speak for "we got caught." And a couple days later, Patricia called me with a voice full of sugar, said we should clear up this misunderstanding over coffee, neighbor to neighbor, and I told her I'd be happy to have coffee, with a microphone, in front of the entire council during public comment. Then hung up and installed 4 security cameras around Ravenshore, cloud backup and all, because if she wanted escalation, I was going to film every frame. While the town tried to figure out how deep her fingerprints ran, Patricia prepped her own counterattack. I walked into the monthly HOA meeting, dressed decent, ready to talk about illegal covenants, and found every chair already occupied by a glossy flyer screaming about safety concerns at Ravenshore, accusing me of running an unsafe construction site, attracting trespassers, contaminating the lake with debris, doing unlicensed electrical work, all complete fiction printed on expensive cardstock with charts that made nonsense look like fact. And as neighbors I'd never met read and frowned, Patricia sat at the front of the room with her pearls and her perfect hair, wearing the satisfied little smile of someone certain the vote is already in the bag. She proposed an emergency bylaw that would let the Harbor Heights Association declare any unoccupied, uninhabitable home a nuisance after 90 days and order it demolished at the owner's expense, carefully insisting this wasn't about any one person, while everyone in the room glanced at me, and instead of shouting I calmly plugged my phone into the projector, pulled up footage from my new cameras showing Gordon's pickup sneaking onto my dock late at night, dumping bags of beer cans and trash they later blamed on rowdy teens. Followed that with lab tests from a state-certified facility showing my shoreline clean and elevated bacteria levels near one of Patricia's rental properties, and then a summary from a lawyer friend at the VA, Noah Briggs, explaining why retroactive rules aimed at a specific owner die fast in court. I told that room, quietly, that I didn't know if Patricia wanted my land for a personal deal or just couldn't stand a guy with a limp and a disability check owning a piece of her lake. But either way, I wasn't going anywhere, and that if they passed that bylaw, I'd enjoy watching it get shredded by a judge. And when I finished, Olivia from the Gazette started clapping. A few people joined her. Patricia's cheeks went crimson, and she walked out without even closing the meeting, leaving Gordon scrambling for the gavel like a rookie. What followed was harassment by 1,000 paper cuts, code officers suddenly seeing overgrown vegetation where I'd purposely planted wildflowers certified as habitat, hazardous chemicals in perfectly stored paint cans, open foundation where standard vents were, each ticket carrying daily fines designed to bleed me out. Until one night in my little camper, space heater buzzing, knee aching, I stared at a stack of citations worth 15 grand if I didn't fold and genuinely wondered if Grandma Lillian would want me to wreck my life over a house she'd never seen. That's when my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. My old contractor Derek Miles, the one who'd had to pull his crew when the stop work hit, called and said he'd work weekends for free if I covered materials, because his kids needed to see their father stand up to bullies. My neighbor Monica Ruiz, 2 lots over and allergic to HOA nonsense, said she'd seen who dumped a dead raccoon on my porch as a scare tactic and was willing to sign a statement. Olivia said she'd been digging and found that Patricia had tried to lowball the previous owner of Ravenshore, Arthur and Hannah Monroe, threatening via email to have the property condemned and seized if they didn't accept her bargain offer, essentially extortion with the planning board as backup. Within weeks, the district attorney's office and the county seat had that email. Noah had filed a formal complaint about a fraudulent lien Patricia slapped on my house claiming unpaid HOA dues, and the Brightwater Gazette ran a front-page story about a veteran fighting HOA overreach that turned Patricia's name from powerful to toxic practically overnight. And in the middle of all this, every Saturday, more people showed up at Ravenshore. Vets from the VFW, neighbors sick of nonsense, Monica's church friends, to haul lumber, rip out bad wiring under the supervision of Caleb Shaw, a licensed electrician and former soldier, and turn a crumbling mansion into something alive again. We joked, we cursed stripped screws, we passed paint trays like communion, and while Walt Harper from the local sawmill dropped off reclaimed oak flooring as interest on the $2 grand he said Patricia had extorted from his grandson for a deck permit, while Monica's daughter Jenna sketched new tile layouts on scrap paper, the war shifted. Patricia tried filing a lien. Noah got it yanked and slapped her with a threat of triple damages. The TV news in the regional city picked up the story of a planning board queen bee using her office to line her pocket. And suddenly the woman who'd been untouchable for decades was under investigation for abuse of office, extortion, and everything in between. She wasn't finished, though. At 3 in the morning one freezing week, I got an alert from my cameras and watched live as a truck linked to Gordon's in-laws backed up to my drive and dumped a mountain of construction debris and labeled asbestos bags right where the county inspector would stand in a few hours. A frame job so sloppy, it would have been funny if hazmat cleanup didn't cost real money. And when Frank showed up practically salivating at the thought of felony charges, I played the footage for the sheriff's deputy, who quietly taped off the scene and called it what it was, a crime scene that didn't lead to me. By then, the DA had added sabotage and witness intimidation to Patricia's file. Her brokerage Langford and Company shut its doors. Her license was suspended. For lease signs went up on her office windows. And I moved a cot into Ravenshore's front hall, because if she wanted the house, she was going to have to see my face in every doorway she tried to kick down. The last big swing she tried to take came in the form of a quiet luxury car rolling into my drive one gray December afternoon. Patricia sat behind the wheel of her white sedan, engine idling, hands clenched on the steering wheel, and after watching her sit there for a full minute, I walked down the steps and waited, breath fogging, heart steady. She cracked the window just enough to be heard, her hair still perfect but her face carved up by sleepless nights, and offered me $300,000 cash to walk away in 30 days, said if I took the deal she'd make sure the DA backed off, like she still believed she could boss the justice system around with the same voice she used on landscapers. I told her politely she didn't have that pull anymore, that this house wasn't for sale at any price, especially not to her, and something in her snapped. She spit out the truth she usually kept behind pearls, raging that she'd worked this town for years, built relationships, made things happen, and couldn't stomach watching a guy like you. Her eyes flicking to my brace. Owned the property she'd always pictured as hers, said out loud that she didn't think someone with a limp and a veteran's check deserved a place like Ravenshore. And when she finally realized I was wearing a small body camera clipped to my collar, recording every syllable in a one-party consent state. The color drained from her face faster than the lake in November. I sent that audio to Noah, to Olivia, to the DA's office, and within days the local news ran a piece not just about legal violations, but about entitlement, about a woman who thought she could decide who belonged and who didn't on public soil. And the comment sections lit up with stories, from contractors she'd squeezed for kickbacks to widows she'd pressured into selling homes too big for one person. And by the time the community impact hearing rolled around, Patricia wasn't a feared power broker anymore. She was a cautionary tale in a Navy suit. The night of the hearing, the town hall in Brightwater overflowed. People lining the walls and watching through the windows, news cameras in the back, the district attorney Melissa Granger reading out charges, abuse of office, extortion, attempted bribery, filing false instruments, intimidation, and then inviting those harmed to speak. I went first, told them about Grandma Lillian's clipped magazine pictures, and that whispered one day about buying Ravenshore Estate fair and square at auction, and being told, essentially, that a broken-down vet didn't fit the picture for Harbor Heights, about the dead animals on my porch, the fake violations, the lien, the dump of asbestos at 3 in the morning, and how the only reason I was still standing was because neighbors and strangers decided they weren't going to look away. After me, Hannah Monroe, daughter of the original owner, appeared on a projector from across the country, voice trembling as she described Patricia's email threatening to push her father's house into condemnation if they didn't accept her off-market bargain basement offer. Then Monica spoke about the raccoon and teaching her daughter not to bow to bullies. Then Walt. Then a string of others whose stories formed a pattern no one could ignore. And when Melissa turned to Patricia and asked if she wanted to make a statement, all that came out was no comment, which told the room everything they needed to know about remorse. Charges stuck, plea deals were negotiated. In the end, Patricia Langford lost her real estate license for good, resigned from every board, stood in front of a judge for sentencing on reduced counts, was ordered to pay restitution, including $15,000 that landed in my account and went straight into the Lillian Caldwell Trade Scholarship at the local library, a fund to help kids learn carpentry, plumbing, electrical war, the stuff that built this country while people like her pushed paper. And then she quietly sold her own house and left for another state where, I hope, the cameras are just as sharp. As for Harbor Heights, the old HOA structure practically collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and resignations. Neighbors formed a simple Silvercrest neighbors circle, no fines, no enforcement muscle, just folks watching out for each other, planning lake cleanups instead of witch hunts. And Ravenshore Estate finally passed its last inspection on a bright March morning. The new inspector, supervising Frank very closely, signed off on every outlet, beam, and brace, handed me a certificate of occupancy that felt less like paperwork and more like proof that I hadn't imagined the last year of my life. We threw the doors open for an open house that weekend, 200 people wandering through rooms that used to echo with emptiness. Now glowing with restored oak floors, Walt had helped mill, stained glass that Monica found an artist to repair, a kitchen Caleb had wired and tiled, laughter bouncing off plaster that no longer crumbled at a touch, kids running down to a rebuilt dock Derek and his brother-in-law put back together. And as the sun sank over Silvercrest Lake, the water picking up colors from the sky and bouncing them onto Ravenshore's new windows, I stood on the porch and felt something inside me finally unclench. I live in the master suite now, rent the other rooms out as a little artist residency and retreat. Let people who make music or paintings or books wake up to the same sunrise that kept me sane when the bank letters and violation notices stacked up. And on the front beam, I bolted a sign carved from reclaimed oak, polished until it glows. Ravenshore Estate. 1924/Reborn 2025. My daughter Kayla helps run the place between semesters. Monica's daughter Jenna starts electrician school this fall, with help from the scholarship. And most mornings I sit on the dock with a 3-legged rescue dog named Sergeant, watch the mist lift off the lake, and think about how close this house came to being just another pile of rubble in somebody else's development brochure. So now I want to ask you, and I'm asking honestly, when a small circle of people with titles and connections decides your home, your land, your work are just obstacles to their plans, do you think it's enough to keep your head down and hope they show mercy? Or is there a point where standing up, documenting every slight, Pushing back with the law and with community stops being revenge and starts being justice. And if you've ever had to fight an HOA, a petty official, or a neighbor who thought they owned you, what did you do? What would you do differently? And where do you draw the line between keeping the peace and refusing to be pushed off your own porch?